All right, guys, I want to talk about wetlands and flood zone. This applies more broadly to really any undesirable characteristic of land when you're looking at it. But these two are a great example of what I'm trying to illustrate, which is that it comes down to supply and demand, right? So let me use this lot as an example. 1571 here on Beaver Dam Court. I remember this lot well because the guy bought it for $12,000 a few years ago. Last year we had an agreement. It's a lead that came in at 24. He didn't sign. We sent him the contract and everything, and he ended up selling it for like 65,000 with a few days on market. So it's covered in the worst flood zone in the area, and it's covered in wetlands. That's what this is right here. There's a little bit of space without wetlands, but given the size of the lots and size of the homes, the home would still go into the wetlands. A lot of people would recommend, oh, don't touch that lot, which is terrible advice because it's relative to what is the demand and what are people doing in that neighborhood. So, Regrid gives a better view. This lot is also covered in the flood zone and has the wetland going through the middle of it. That's going right through the home, yet they still built. This one's covered in the flood zone and wetland too. These are all covered in the flood zone. If you scroll around the neighborhood, you'll find quickly that people are building along this kind of marshy river area, right? There's water that flows through here. Even though this is all terrible flood zone, and most of these have wetlands. Why? Because this is a desirable neighborhood where people want to be, so they put up with it and they pay the money needed to build anyways. So you can't, or you can, but it would cost you that you shouldn't have arbitrary rules like, oh, it's got a wetland or a flood zone, I'm not going to touch it. The question is, what is the demand and what are people buying in the neighborhood? Regardless of any arbitrary rules. So if you look around at comps, you'll see many of them are in both the same wetland and flood zone. Of course, if it's totally high and dry, as they say, it's more desirable, but um, that doesn't totally discount these ones. Again, he sold it very quickly in the 60s. Right? So looking around at where the houses are is the best way to quickly get an idea whether the wetland and flood zone kill the deal. Beyond that, talking to locals, looking at recent comps, you can find this out quickly for yourself. Let me give a couple other examples here. So this is in eastern El Paso County. And out here in Colorado, El Paso, Colorado, not Texas, for anyone that doesn't know where that is, uh, out here, there's so much land not in a flood zone. You know, this is at 6,000 feet. People avoid the flood zone like the plague. And if we follow this, see, they made sure they're not in it. They made sure they're not in it. None of the flood zone area has any sort of houses on it. Come down, you'll see people built their homes further back, right? These are big lots. This is expensive to do this big of a driveway. This guy built way back, avoiding the flood zone, avoiding the flood zone. He moved his house over to the side of the lot, avoiding the flood zone. You'll see that's the trend. Here's a one-off that's in a flood zone. But maybe they got the lot really, really cheaply. Of course, if you get it cheap enough, you can compensate for it. But the vast majority of the time, as you scroll along, you'll see that almost everybody avoids the flood zone. So right away, I know that flood zones are way more of a detriment to price, to desirability in this market. Again, and you want to do a little more work than that, scroll around more, talk to realtors, but this gives me a pretty good idea pretty quickly. Here's an example of the same thing in North Carolina, but with wetlands. If you see, none of these lots with wetlands are developed, just the ones that kind of barely get by as being dry have homes on them. Again, you can pay for wetland mitigation, you can still build, but in this area, it's cheap, and there's lots of lots that don't have it, so very few people do. I'm guessing that this is just slightly off and that they're out of the wetlands too. If you scroll through here, you'll find some that are in it, but they likely got the land for next to nothing. So, for the purposes of what we're doing, buying and selling land, in somewhere like this, it's pretty much worthless if it's totally covered in wetlands. Again, talk to a local realtor. You can still sell it, but very, very cheaply. So, this is how you should think about this. And again, it's true more broadly to really any characteristic that you think is a problem. What do the comps have? Do they also have that same issue? You know, um, look at you'll find some areas that are very, very in demand, and all the lots that are suitable for conventional septic are built out, and all the remaining lots have to have engineered septic or tons of fill dirt brought in, etc., which makes it very expensive. But if it's a desirable area and nothing else is available, then people will put up with it and they'll buy them anyways. So arbitrary rules will cost you money. Make sure you understand the dynamics of the market and whether or not there's enough demand to trump the potential negative characteristics of lots in that given area. So, local experts are your friend. That is beyond these simple ways of getting a preliminary look, the primary way we've been able to navigate this in different markets.